coffee, big cup, and hello. Welcome back to another episode of the Gilmore Way Podcast. I'm Laura.
And I'm Kate. And our queen, Kelly Bishop, wrote a book. And it's finally time to talk about it. We pre-ordered signed copies through Premier Collectibles. Laura took care of that for us. And they arrived just before FanFest. They were slightly delayed. And her mailing me my copy would have been ridiculous because I was about to see her anyway. So it took us a minute to be able to sit down and read the book. But now we have both done that, and it is time to talk about it.
Yeah. Fair warning, and I think it should go without saying that as we are discussing an actual novel, that this will be a spoilers all podcast. If you have not read this book yet, go pick up a copy. Any bookstore will have it. Amazon, Target, your heart's desire there with your options. But definitely go pick up a copy of this and read it. You will not be disappointed. Also, just another random disclaimer that we need to throw out there this evening. If you do hear kitty noises in the background, Vinny, my beloved, is kind of going crazy with the zoomies this evening. It is what it is. We support cats in this household. We're big animal lovers. So if you hear that, or you hear running around, or just your random meow, just go with it, because we appreciate it, and we thought you might too. He may even make an appearance. He does that sometimes.
Yeah, I feel like Kelly would approve. She's a big animal lover. She'd be like, yes, the animals are showing up for talk about my book.
Yes, yeah. They are.
I went with my new New York mug that I got on the way back from FanFest. I was sold by the fact that it has buffalo wings on it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big fan of the Starbucks You Are Here mugs. So I thought New York would be super fitting because so much of Kelly's history and life occurred there or nearby. And so I thought about using my Team Logan mug because she has come out publicly and professed her team. It's funny because when I was watching the 92nd Street Y discussion that she did with Lauren was like, so I hear that you came out as Team Logan, and my question for you is, did you hire a bodyguard? So that was the choice, New York or Logan.
Yeah. Kelly, I mean, you came this close to perfection, but it's okay. I still love you anyway.
Speaking of perfection, what did you think of this book overall? What were your feelings and your impressions? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Were you somewhere in the middle? Tell me.
I can't love it more than I did. It was bold for an autobiography. I wish everyone who wrote about themselves had the nerve and the backbone to write about their own lives in the way that Kelly has, because she did not shy away from being so raw and so truthful about her own life. And we'll get to all of those topics that she addresses in the book, but she touches on even what are still, I think, in 2024 going into 2025 can still be some really taboo topics. But even her making some of those choices about those topics that we'll get to, like abortion and choosing to be child-free, and how she manages her interpersonal relationships and her relationships with men. She was just so far ahead of her time, even decades ago. And just seeing her sit down and just write this book and being so forthcoming about her struggles, her own choices, and just having no shame in them, and expecting everybody else to just not have any shame in them either in terms of how they see her. This woman does not give two you-know-whats about how she has chosen to live her life and what other people may think about her. And if I can start off with one of my biggest takeaways from this book, is that she is so comfortable in her own skin. She is truthful and real to herself and who she is, and she is not afraid to tell you about it.
I feel very much the same. That was very well put. It makes me think of Paris's line in To Live and Let Diorama. I want to live a life so that I'll be able to read an in-depth biography about myself in later years and not puke. And I feel like Emily, I keep calling her Emily. I keep doing it. Kelly.
It's acceptable. It's acceptable.
I know. Anything but Carol, really. I don't know that I'll ever truly get Carol to stick. But it feels like that's what she accomplished here. The word I wrote in my notes was audacious. It was bold. It was raw. It was honest and no holds barred. And I really appreciate that in a memoir. And I think that a big part of that is because you know, she wrote this book in her late 70s. Now I think she's 80. Yeah, 80, because she's born February 28th, 1944. So she's about to turn 81 in a few months. And I think from that vantage point in your life, you have so much perspective and you're beyond caring what people have to say about you and what they think about you, because you know yourself by that point. You know who you are, and you're not afraid to be that person, and you're not afraid to burn bridges if you must. I don't necessarily think she did that in this book, but you know, in her life in the past, she knew eventually when to cut and run. She learned those lessons, and she passed some of that wisdom to us through these anecdotes. And I think it was just such a moving memoir that absolutely gut punched me from the dedication. So I think that's a mark of a great book. I think it was so well executed. It was, like I said, open and honest, but with her subtle humor. She did have the help of a co-writer who potentially helped her organize things and maybe structure things, but I think that the synergy of that partnership worked really well to bring these stories out in a way that was not only clear and made perfect sense, but also quite poetic at the same time.
Yeah. I love that word audacious, because I feel like if I was writing about my own life, there are so many things that I would not want to say because I would be scared about facing judgment from other people, even for some things that you think, don't warrant that. But it's just so scary to put yourself out there in that way. And she did it. And she continues in all of the book tours that she's done, in all of the interviews that I've seen her do for this book, just continue to just be herself, no holds barred, with no care or thought to how she's going to be perceived. What you see is what you get with her. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate that.
Yeah, I always struggle with wanting to put celebrities up on pedestals, because every time I've done it in the past, I've been let down by them. And there's nothing about Kelly Bishop necessarily that gives me too many red flags about praising her. There was one Woody Allen mention that maybe could have come along with a disclaimer about, like, by the way, just because I think he was funny doesn't mean I approve of what he's done. So just glossing over that was maybe like the one thing where I could point to her and be like, girl, maybe don't give him so much praise. But other than that, like, I do feel like while she's not a perfect person, she is somebody in the entertainment industry that you can look up to and that you can view as a good person to be like, yes, girl, you're my gal, you know?
Yeah, we approve. But I want to get started going into, obviously, how this book kicks off, especially with, Amy's intro and her early thoughts on To Kelly. And I think it's really telling that the book starts off with an intro from Amy. I mean, it makes sense because, who knows her better than Amy? Not very many people, probably, other than, her husband or her ex-husband or her close family. But what did you think about what Amy said in that forward with how she met Kelly, how she came in for this audition, and how that correlates to what we saw in Kelly's portrayal of Emily Gilmore?
That's such an interesting question. I was intrigued by the forward because it's so strange to read Amy in writing that's not her scripts. Like, this is just her free-flowing thoughts. And it feels very much like her. I'd be like, if you hadn't told me who wrote this forward, I would have been like, that's Amy Sherman Palladino. I would have clocked it immediately because she had such a distinctive writing style. And she tells the story of workshopping the title. The original had a "the" in it. The network had a heart attack. No one would watch something called The Gilmore Girls. Too girly. Men won't think they're sex. Boys won't think anyone gets punched. They insisted we change the name. They did some testing, and the brilliant decision was to drop the. She referred to the lead being in her 30s, which was 1,000 by WB standards. And then she kind of goes into that story of how they started to cast and how Emily was something that she saw very clearly in her head from the beginning. She knew this family unit had to work. She knew Emily had to be a very particular kind of woman. She could see the swagger, her icy stare, her cutting humor, her elegance, her deep hurt and vulnerability, which she covers with sarcasm and Chanel suits. Without Kelly, I never would have been able to have a room completely dedicated to hats in the middle of New York City. You know, she nailed this casting, it seems. I've heard this story many times about how they went back and forth on other things and how Lauren wasn't available at first and Alexis wasn't necessarily a shoo-in, but Kelly did this one interview and audition with Amy in person in New York City. They immediately hit it off. Emily comes in and God, again.
It's okay. It's okay.
It's gonna happen, people. I'm sorry. Kelly comes in, knocks it out of the park. They immediately have this kinship, and she doesn't hear for a while that she's gotten this role, but then she gets a call from her agent who's like, yeah, you don't have to go to the West Coast because you got the job. You're going to Toronto. And it was just so easy. It was so like there's so much, that's what I'm looking for, synchronicity and fate. There's a level of fate, which is a theme I think that runs through both Kelly's life and the themes of Gilmore Girls as well. There was just this sort of kismet thing that was happening around this time where she ended up in the show, and I think it's hard to imagine anyone else as Emily Gilmore.
Yeah, I would agree. And not even, I'm just going to spitball off of that, just how much Amy loves her and appreciate her, but just the fondness that we still, in this day and age in 2024, get from Lauren Graham for, I was about to say Emily Gilmore. I will just do what you're doing in reverse. The fondness that Lauren has for Kelly. If I didn't know any better, you could probably look at them and say, like, are you actually real life mother and daughter? Because the love is there. The appreciation is there. The fact that, you know, Lauren dropped what she was doing and flew to New York to moderate her 92Y panel, which, by the way, go check that out if you haven't, because that was also brilliant. But the respect there is so prevalent. And I think that's what made them such a strong duo on screen for all of the years that we got them on Gilmore, because they really were able to embody the mother-daughter relationship that we saw. I think that also has to do with a lot of Kelly's background, which we'll definitely get to talking about, because I think that definitely inspired her and shaped her with how she approached the role. But I think it definitely did the both of them wonders in terms of you can really buy into this pairing and see them as that.
Yeah, the 92nd Street Y talk was so cute. Lauren was like, you know, this sounds like what they usually say at the end, but this is not the end. And then she just gushes about her, and they're like, I love you. I love you. And it's the sweetest thing. So yes, if you haven't watched that, definitely worth an hour of your life. But yeah, I also love how Amy sort of reflects on the fact that show business is weird because you work closely with people for years, but then a lot of them just sort of drop off. You never speak to them again. But the fact that they regularly have lunches in New York City, and you know, this is jumping ahead a little bit, but I do love the anecdote about Kelly attending a Thanksgiving dinner at their brownstone in Brooklyn Heights. And the fact that Chris Eigenman lives 4 doors down, I'm like, that was perfect. I love that so much. But yeah, the longevity of their friendship is a true testament to the beautiful working relationship and the synergy that they had going on during this time. And it's so wonderful when you're a big fan of a show to know that the cast has that much respect and care and fondness for each other, even 20 years later, to the point where they're regularly seeing each other and hanging out and getting together to do Gilmore Girls things because everybody still loves this project so much. You know, we've seen the magic of that at FanFest the last few years. And, you know, it's not just them. It's so many people who are so happy to have been a part of this because it was somehow this weird magical experience for everyone. And you don't get that with a lot of things.
Yeah, it really is a very singular, one-of-a-kind experience to have. And I think even reading this book was just a very singular experience, again, in its own right, for what we got out of it. But I want to, before we start getting into obviously her relationships with Lauren, her relationships with Alexis and Amy, and her time on the show, I just want to bring us back a little bit and start off by recognizing that Kelly did not start out as a Hollywood actress. She didn't just jump right into television and film. She got her start on Broadway doing theater work. I know you told me that you had just recently seen A Chorus Line. So talk to me about that, what you thought of that production, your watch of it, and her beginnings, in theater and on Broadway, leading up to what we eventually get from her down the line.
Right. Before I do that, I did have one last comment from the foreword, which I think you'll get a kick out of. You must have chortled at this line. But, offering Kelly repeated jobs because they just love working together so much. And Amy saying, "You try getting her out of Jersey."
Hey, cheers.
Because she does live in South Orange, I think, to this day. So, yeah, going back and forth to the West Coast is hard, especially, when you're 80. I don't like doing it, and I'm in my 30s, so I prefer flying west than flying east. That's beside the point. Anyway, going back to A Chorus Line, I've been wanting to watch it ever since I read this book. Like, truly, I read this book, and it made me cry, and it threw me into a little bit of a cyclothymic downturn. It was sort of like a mini depression. Don't take that the wrong way. Don't make that a reason not to read this book, because I say that simply because I was so touched, and not everybody will have the same sort of reaction that I did. But I was just so impressed and moved by the whole thing, and so curious about some of her other work that I didn't want to do anything else after this besides wallow in the love that I had for it. And that kind of led into just wanting to watch everything that she was in. So I binged all of Bunheads immediately. I think it took me like 3 days. I had watched the pilot a while back, and it was, the word I keep using is bonkers. And I didn't know how I was going to feel about it, but I'd heard people say, like, keep watching, it gets better, it's far more likable, it deserved more. I don't know why they didn't renew it. And so I was like, okay, like, at this point, I feel like I need to be an Amy Sherman Palladino completionist and just watch what she's done, just so that I have a wider frame of reference for all of her work. And so I watched Bunheads, and then I was like, I also really want to watch A Chorus Line, especially because of her deeply intertwined role in creating the character of Sheila Bryant, because it was such a unique process that she describes in this book. And I didn't know any of this backstory until right now. I don't have a deep knowledge of theater or Broadway or the entertainment industry. I'm getting bits and pieces here and there as time goes on, and everything I've encountered I've really enjoyed. And so I feel like I really need to deepen some of that knowledge and appreciation. I was thinking while reading this, I was like, we need to plan a trip to New York where we just, the whole theme of it is just Broadway, just 42nd Street. We need to go back to the Soho. We need to go back to Midtown, Times Square, Theater District, see a bunch of shows, go to Joe Allen's, go to Sardi's, go to Village Vanguard, just, all of these places that are so iconic in the entertainment industry and the theater industry, and really immerse ourselves in that. So, and
twist my arm.
I know. And that desire really came out of hearing the story about A Chorus Line. And so I finally found some time to squeeze it in this morning. So it's a 2-hour movie, and I watched it this morning and was so impressed by it. And then I watched a few clips on YouTube from the original show, and just got to see Kelly really in her element doing her thing. But it was such a unique thing where it was just a bunch of dancers and creatives getting together and having this moment of catharsis and connection where they're talking about not only their careers but their lives and getting to know each other. And she said, there was this sort of magic in that. And I totally understand that, because there was one thing I did with my sorority back the year that I first joined. It was a little gift exchange. Like, everybody brought something that meant something to them, and then they told the story of why it was impactful, and then you would leave it on the table, and in the morning when you got up, you would take a gift from someone else whose story you resonated with. And by the end of it, we were all just like emotional crying messes because it was so beautiful to connect like that. And that was what I was thinking about when I was reading that story. And I understand the profundity of that. And so the fact that it turned into this play, like that Michael Bennett had this idea to be like, let's use this, let's tell these stories, but set it to the music of Marvin Hamlish. And it's just a stroke of genius that was credited with saving Broadway. I didn't even know Broadway needed saving. So I just thought it was such an interesting story that her childhood was put into song and that she was given the opportunity to play herself, essentially, with, you know, some creative liberties taken here and there, and become a part of this thing that has endured and that was, you know, awarded Tonys and is still talked of with so much reverence in the theater community. It was just such a cool story.
Yeah, I agree. It's been a while since I've seen it. I have yet to revisit it for quite some time. I think I may have to go back and do that. So it's not as fresh in my mind as it obviously is for you. But just bouncing off of what you said, I'm just going to like blanket statement say this because I think it definitely was what we saw and what Kelly might have experienced with her time on Chorus Line, but also with Gilmore and the other shows that she's done, is that acting is therapy. And don't ask me to extrapolate on that because this is going to be a 60-minute episode, not a 6-hour episode. If you want to hear me do a TED Talk on that, we can organize it another time. But there's so much, I think, to be gained from stepping into another character's shoes and into another person's life and then just embodying that. And I think one of the reasons why Kelly was always able to do it so well from a Chorus Line up until what she is currently working on as we head into 2025 is because she's able to take her past experiences and take what has happened to her in real life and insert that into her characters and use that as motivation and use it as a source of like empathy and compassion. And that's what makes her a really great actor across the board, which is why I think she is just phenomenal.
Yeah. I'll give a few more thoughts on the movie and then we should move on to sort of how At the Ballet transitions in the book. But there were a few little things that stuck out to me. One of the earlier ones was someone commenting on, you know, how brutal the director is, which is pretty typical from the sounds of it in any audition process like this. And someone's like, what's he looking for? And someone says Baryshnikov, which is funny because in 1980, which I think was 6 years before this, or a few years at least before this, Mikhail Baryshnikov starred with Liza Minnelli in a TV special called Baryshnikov on Broadway, and he danced with the cast of A Chorus Line. They did the one finale song on stage for that. And so it's so funny that they were almost like referencing back to this thing that kind of actually happened. So I thought that was intriguing. Nicole Fosse was in that movie, daughter of Broadway legend Bob Fosse. God, can't talk already. And I also just wanted to comment on the fact that like you could really feel Kelly Bishop in Vicky Frederick, who was playing Sheila in the movie. I felt like she was able to match that sass level. You can feel the attitude towards Zach, which is, you know, Michael Bennett. And I thought she captured that spirit so well and had that same sharpness to her that I really appreciated. Like I was sitting there being like, she nailed this. And then there was another one that I don't know, you probably haven't watched this since you moved, but Bobby Mills, he's like, I come from upstate New York, somewhere near Buffalo. I can't remember the name of the town. I blocked it out.
It's okay.
I was always thinking up these spectacular ways to kill myself, but then I realized that committing suicide in Buffalo was redundant. Awful, but somehow hilarious. Yeah. Point being, I really enjoyed A Chorus Line, and, you know, knowing Kelly's story helped the story resonate even more in watching it. And I recognized the character types of the people that she was talking about. But I love what they do in this book with introducing the lyrics to her song at the ballet, which she sings as a trio with a few other characters, and how the lyrics really line up to her life, or are at least strongly inspired by it.
Mm-hmm. Do you think, from what you saw, that there is that takeaway from her own personal life and her relationships, not only with men, but even going into her relationships with her mother, that she brought to the table? And how strong did she bring in her own personal life into that? Do you think it helped her? Do you think it hurt her?
I think it was mostly her family life that really made it in. Unless there's a bunch that didn't make it into the movie. Because I know when I was watching the clip of her doing it, there were some extra lines there for Sheila that I didn't just hear in the movie. And so I think it truly was, especially her family life, her dad and her mom and their relationship to each other. You know, the lyrics to the song are, "Daddy always thought that he married beneath him. That's what he said. That's what he said. When he proposed, he informed my mother he was probably her very last chance. And though she was 22, though she was 22, though she was 22, she married him. Life with my dad wasn't ever a picnic, more like a come as you are. When I was 5, I remember my mother dug earrings out of the car. I knew that they weren't hers, but it wasn't something you'd want to discuss. He wasn't warm, well, not to her, well, not to us. But everything was beautiful at the ballet. Graceful men lift lovely girls in white. Yes, everything was beautiful at the ballet. I was happy at the ballet. Up a steep and very narrow stairway to the voice like a metronome. Up a steep and very narrow stairway. It wasn't paradise. It wasn't paradise, but it was home. Mother always said I'd be very attractive when I grew up, when I grew up. Different, she said, with a special something and a very, very personal flair. And though I was 8 or 9, though I was 8 or 9, though I was 8 or 9, I hated her. Now, different is nice, but it sure isn't pretty. Pretty is what it's about. I never met anyone who was different who couldn't figure that out. And then she kind of goes into that almost line by line, how it lines up to her childhood and her life, where, you know, her mom was born in 1917. There weren't a lot of options for women. Lawrence Bishop essentially gaslit Jane into a marriage because he's like, who else is going to want you? Like, I'm your last chance to get married because you're 22, like, spinster. And how he was just so detached and distant and unsupportive. I believe the words Kelly used were something along the lines of unapologetic philanderer. Like, you know, very unsubtle about the fact that he was not a faithful family man. And so hearing that story after and her going through and kind of breaking this down line by line, she would tell a story and then insert the line that we saw in the first chapter, and it all tied itself back to each other. And we didn't see a lot of her personal life in terms of men or anything, but obviously all that informed her idea of relationships and what women's possibilities were. But especially from her mom kind of telling her, like, this doesn't have to be your life. Once you have kids, you're never free again. And I want to help you build a career so that you don't feel like your life is over if you don't get married at 18. So I really see a lot just of her mother's unending devotion to her daughter's advancements and talent, and also this sort of other side of it. And even though Emily, God, I keep doing it, Kelly is extremely fond of her mother. She says that they were best friends, which sound familiar. There was still a little bit of an inappropriate relationship there where her mother viewed her as her confidant, told her things she probably wasn't old enough to hear, and said things along the line of, you know, when Kelly asked her, will I be pretty? She was listening to Que Sera. Again, it all ties back to Gilmore with that. But she asks her mom, will I be pretty? And her mom pauses and says, you'll be different. You'll have flair. You'll be dramatic. And, you know, for a 9-year-old to hear that in a world obsessed with appearance must have been a hit to her. So, you know, never ask Jane Bishop anything if you don't want an honest answer.
Yeah, but I think it's obviously very apparent that Jane made Emily the person that she is, and why she was able to be as progressive as she was for the time that she was living in as a young woman, in the 70s, and just making all of those choices and being so vocal with how she wanted to live her life. Like you said, just choosing so early on and knowing that she wanted to be child free. So I will give credit all day, every day, to Jane, just for shaping, I was about to say Emily, shaping Kelly to just be the woman that we have come to see and know and love. And I think just she's so emblematic of just being a strong, independent woman who can make her own choices and have that autonomy. And I just think that's really just amazing to see.
It's funny because you said Emily earlier too, and how Jane influenced her to being the person she was. And I think that's funny because in a way, Jane did influence Emily, because, this is once again jumping ahead a little bit, but her relationship with her mother especially really added layers to her performance of Emily Gilmore and her understanding of the dynamics between Emily and Lorelai. So I think it still works.
Yeah. Emily, Kelly, just, it's one and the same, you guys, to a certain extent. So
yeah, I think Kelly Bishop is just sort of like a figment of our imaginations. It's like, this is my alter ego, but really I'm Emily Gilmore.
Yeah. Now, do you want to continue to talk more about her relationship with her mother? Anything else to say there? Or do you want to start getting into maybe what her mother was advising her, and basically the thoughts that she was giving her, and the life coaching that she was giving her played into then how she started to broach her relationship with men and partners?
I think the most interesting one there was when Kelly started dating Roy Volkman, and they were living together in New York City, and her mom was clearly not impressed. And this was in the days before email and cell phones and text messages. And so they had to write letters to each other to stay apprised of each other's lives. And so when Kelly informed her that she was living with a man out of wedlock, she received a letter back that was very clearly like, "You're living in sin." And she chose to ignore it. She went on living that way because she enjoyed it. She didn't see a problem with it. She wore a wedding ring to assuage her landlords, which I can see. And she didn't respond to that letter from her mom. And I think her mom got the picture. There was like, I can offer my opinions, but ultimately at the end of the day, Kelly's going to do what Kelly's going to do. And it's more important to maintain a good relationship with my daughter than to be judgmental like that. And so I don't know that we saw much besides support after that. And I think that's a good lesson for any parent, where it's like, if you start to push like that and you start to receive pushback and struggle with your kid because you don't approve necessarily, you need to look at that in yourself and maybe detach yourself from your own ideas of how the world works and just let them do their own thing. And I think that's maybe a lesson that Emily Gilmore never learned.
Clearly not. I mean, maybe I think by the revival she might have gotten to that point, but it was a long time coming.
Yeah. It only took her 72 years to figure out, or I guess 48, because that's how long Lorelai had been around by that point. But it only took her that long to realize that Lorelai was going to be her own person and do her own thing regardless of her mom's opinions. So I like that Kelly learned that a little bit sooner, and that Kelly had the nerve to stand up to her mom, who was her best friend and biggest cheerleader, and say, "Look, I'm happy and there's nothing wrong with what I'm doing. So get on board."
Yeah. So kudos to her for that. I kind of want to move us along now into just briefly talking about her relationship with Peter, unless you have anything else that you want to add before that.
No, not really.
Okay. So then she, meets Peter in her mid-20s, which at that point, again, holy moly, spinster, how have you not settled down and popped out like 5 babies right now? What are you doing with your life? You're a failure. Thank God we're slowly just in 2024 exiting from that line of thinking. But her relationship with Peter really struck me because I think that relationship was just very much a sunk cost fallacy relationship. And I was about to say, I'm like, if I do it, whatever. It's just gonna happen. I'm not gonna even start trying to like. At that point in time, I think Kelly makes an excellent point, and I think she was not the only person in history to ever fall guilty of this. I think it's still happening right and left in this day and age. When you're in a relationship or when you're in a marriage with somebody who is not right for you, but you have invested so much time and effort into it, and just the thought of having to deal with the emotional devastation of a breakup or a divorce and a marriage falling apart and ending, and what that is going to take from you, again, in that emotional capacity, and how it's going to like essentially wreck you. And do I ever have the wherewithal to ever meet somebody new again? Will I ever, or am I going to spend the rest of my life alone? If I do meet somebody, it's probably going to take months, if not years, to build back up another strong relationship that could progress toward a marriage. So do I want to risk that, knowing that it's not even a certainty, and try and put in all of that time and effort for years with somebody else? Or do I just want to like settle for what I have now, even though I know it's not perfect, just because I've already invested so much time into it? And I think that's what she started to recognize in herself with Peter. And thank goodness that she eventually got out of it. But I think it was very much a relationship of, again, like I just said, sunk cost fallacy. I've put in so much time and effort here that it's hard to walk away from, but that never means that you shouldn't walk away from something. So I will applaud her for recognizing that about herself.
Yeah, it's a bit of a cautionary tale in that regard. Don't do that, kiddies. I love what she says, where she's like, I was 26 when I got involved with Peter. Did I really have the spare time, energy, or the inclination anymore to dump him and find myself another potential husband? And that's not the right attitude to have. Yes, there's always time. And if you see red flags and someone is not respecting you in the way that Peter was doing to her, by gambling away their savings and jeopardizing her financial security and their collective future together, because he had to play the ponies that day, because it was about the action. It's not about the money. Definitely get yourself out of that if you can, because yowza, that was bad for her. I love what she says. If it sounds as if I'm trying to justify the fact that I married this man, it's because that's exactly what I'm trying to do. And you never want to have to retroactively justify a relationship like that. It should be far more enthusiastically positive. So I'm just kind of sad for her that she felt that settling was the best option, and that classic I can fix him, no really I can of it all heavily factored into her relationship with him, because most people can't be fixed. I guess I thought I could fix him. I forgot to ask if he wanted to be fixed. And the rabbi that married them, who she ended up being closer to and more fond of than Peter himself, said, if anyone can fix him, it's you, which is really, really messed up. It's horrible that a successful, self-assured woman felt the need to marry an I can fix him. She deserved so much better.
Yeah, I would agree. So, I mean, that's my biggest takeaway from that, is that just do what Kelly did. And if you're in a relationship that's not going places and with someone who doesn't respect you, it doesn't matter how much time and effort you've put into it. When it's time to walk away, it's time to walk away.
Yeah. Another takeaway from that chapter of her time with Peter, though, is that she had cats named Duke and Caesar. It's like foreshadowing.
A little bit.
There are so many things that come up in this where I'm just like, did Amy know about this and specifically write it in, or was it coincidental? And one of those other ones that came to mind was Paradise. The song at the ballet, the line, it wasn't paradise, but it was home, reminds me so much of Bunheads, because the town in Bunheads is called Paradise. And I'm wondering if that was a name that, maybe Amy's co-producer, I forget his name right now. But anyway, like whether that was something he came up with, or whether I think it might have even been based off a book or something. I'm not entirely sure. I wasn't able to verify that, but I feel like I heard it somewhere. I'm like, does this come from somewhere else? Or is Amy such a show nerd and writing this part for Kelly that she put in this nod to the Broadway production that kicked off Kelly's career? Like, I wouldn't put it past her to make that connection and pay homage like that. But there's no way to know unless we can actually ask Amy. So.
Which we will one of these days, because we've talked about how one of these days she'll be here.
Yeah, totally. I'm sure she would love to be on the podcast where I'm constantly shit talking her.
Come at us, Amy. Just defend yourself. We're here for it.
You can take it.
Yeah. But now, as we start getting into, the middle section of this book, we start really seeing what you just alluded to, Kelly's career really taking off. She starts doing really well on Broadway, starts getting, accolades and a Tony win. Has to change her name because there's another person with the same name as her in SAG-AFTRA. But what do you think from what you saw in that writing was Kelly's own personal takeaway from starting to just be noticed and be acclaimed for her performances? And then I'll just follow up that with a second question. Why do you think she eventually moved on from Broadway into television and film when she was doing so well there?
Right. I love the story of how she became Kelly Bishop, where she submits to SAG as Carol Bishop, and then her married name was her sort of backup. And she gets a card back that says Carol Bishop Miller, and she sees it and she's like, all things considered, not just no, but hell no. She saw it in print like that, and it was going to become what she was known as potentially forever. And she couldn't let it stand. And I love that for her. So I love that. And the funny thing, that's an interesting question. I don't know that it changed her all that much. I think she was grateful for everything she had, especially because she wasn't expecting to win that Tony. It was sort of an assumption on the part of everyone that Priscilla Lopez, her best friend, was going to win that. And she was going to be super happy for her when that happened. And so to hear her own name called at the Tonys was like an out-of-body experience where she barely remembered it. And even when she accepted that award, she said, I have to accept this on behalf of everyone in the show because, like, we've all worked on this together. But I'll keep it at my house, though. It's just the cutest moment where she gets off this little joke at the end, and it's just perfect. And I think it goes to show that she's always been fairly unpretentious. Even though she was a big star, she wasn't out there trying to, be the next biggest name. She was just happy to work. Like you said, for her work was therapy, and things would come along to her when she needed them most. She loved immersing herself in these challenges. And I think that carried with her through everything, that she was just always so happy to be working. And it reflects in her work ethic, her determination to consistently get these jobs. And the transition to acting really was as a result of the fact that as a Broadway dancer, a chorus dancer, a showgirl, whatever, you have a shelf life, as crazy as that sounds. I mean, in a way, I totally get it, because from a physicality standpoint, most people can't dance at that level that many times a week forever. Just physically speaking, it's too hard on the body. But obviously, entertainment is a young person's game, and she knew that she was going to need a backup plan, and she had always wanted to act. And so it was the next obvious move for her to try to get roles on stage, in plays, on television, or in movies. And so that's how she got Hawaii Five-0, where she was the madam of a whorehouse. Only prostitutes drink 2 glasses of wine at lunch. Well, then buy me a boa and drive me to Reno, because I am open for business.
Yep, that may or may not have been the reason why I chose to go with the earrings that I did for this particular episode, just as a nod to that line. But I think you're absolutely right. It's ageist, and I don't love it, but there is a shelf life for doing that sort of work. and being in that profession. I feel like Broadway is very much a younger person's game. Obviously there are going to be roles for older men and women, but I think it is really a young person's ball field or playing ground, however you want to allude to it. I think there are more opportunities to exceed going out west, which is what we saw her do. She went out to Hollywood. She started taking on these roles, like you said, Hawaii 5-0, and just really getting her feet wet there. How do you think she did starting out? And how do you think, essentially, not every role is going to be a win. Some things are going to be hit or miss. But do you think from what you read in the book that she was enjoying it as much as Broadway, and how that eventually led to her getting, like, we'll talk about Dirty Dancing, which I think was really something that she became really iconically known for, that led into Gilmore?
It's hard to say because I don't actually know that much about her early acting career other than the stories she tells in this book. I didn't get around to watching An Unmarried Woman, and I've never seen an episode of Hawaii 5-0 in my life. I can only assume she was brilliant because I know her to be a brilliant human and a brilliant actor. So I assume she was great. I do love that she quotes Frank Sinatra at the end of chapter 6, where she's like, if I could make it there, I could make it anywhere. And anywhere sounded like Hollywood. It was just the perfect, like, New York, LA overlap that hit all the right notes for me. Pun totally intended. And she did. We saw she made it. She was able to string together enough work and enough roles and travel bi-coastally long enough to put together a fairly impressive body of work. And someday I do hope to go back and catch An Unmarried Woman, but she's never taken an acting class. And it just shows that she has such a natural presence and a natural read on character and movement and dialogue that something like that maybe can't be taught. It's hard to say. I don't know enough about acting to know how much you can truly pick up what she has so naturally. She's just always been a very dramatic person from the sounds of it, and it just made her so tailor-made for Hollywood.
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of her past work that I have not seen all of either. I would love to go back and obviously enjoy that for myself too. But I think she was just enjoying it herself. And I think that's really important when you're stepping into these roles. If you don't love what you're doing as an actor or an actress, it's going to show. And I never really saw that or got that from her in anything that I have ever seen her in. And I think that's why she was able to just continue to progress and start getting into some of these larger and bigger roles as the decades went on, because she was just having fun with it herself. And I think that's a really important thing.
Yeah. And I think you see a lot of her attitude towards Hollywood and big movie stars and whatnot in her relationship with Kevin, a pseudonym to protect the guilty. But she dated him, I think, for something like 3 years. And the word I used in my notes for him was star effer. He was just the kind of guy who would latch himself on to people who were prominent, to bask in their celebrity and use it to boost his own star to become a performer. He didn't like Kelly so much as he liked the dancer from A Chorus Line who won a Tony, is how she put it. And I think her reaction to him says a lot about her feelings about performers with huge egos, and how that demonstrates to us that she's not one of them. And that demonstrates that really all of this was out of the pure love of the thing. And there's just such a purity to that for me in terms of like the joy, the passion, all of that really comes through not only in the book, but in the work we've seen of her, where it's just, she gets so much joy out of this whole process. Whereas there are people like Kevin who are more like, I just want to be famous. I want people to know that I am powerful and that I am prominent.
Yeah, not the first, certainly will not be the last. And that's not even just like a guy thing. Like, women are very much equally guilty of doing that as well, in relationships with their partners in Hollywood. So it's abhorrent. I hate it. And unfortunately, it stemmed into a pregnancy for Kelly. which she chose not to continue on with. But this is where we start getting into like just the real, I think, meat of her personal life in terms of she starts to really not shy away from telling you why she's making the choices that she's making, why she's doing what she's doing. I love that she can even find reflection enough to be apologetic towards Kevin for not really apprising him fully of what's going on and consulting him on that choice when it is still obviously, predominantly hers to make. But talk to me about what you took away from that in terms of her decision to have an abortion, to continue to remain child free when she had always known that was something that she wanted, and why potentially it was Kevin also that factored into why I'm just not going to allow this pregnancy to continue.
I think this was one of my favorite parts of the book because she put it so well and she was so honest about the rationale for all of this. And it resonated so much with my own views on reproductive rights and this whole question. And it's just one of the things that adds to the list of things where I feel a kinship between Kelly and myself. And I love what she said. It was a non-negotiable statement of fact. I was not going to have this child or any other child ever. Even if I'd been slightly on the fence about that, he was not the man I would have chosen to be the child's father, nor was this a healthy relationship in which a child could have thrived. I never asked him what he thought or how he felt about it, and that was very insensitive of me. I felt, as I still do, that no one knows better than the woman who's pregnant, whether she's suitable to be a committed, nurturing, engaged mother. And I have nothing but admiration for women who give birth knowing that they'll be giving the child up for adoption to someone who will take better care of it than they're capable of. I'm sure I would have found an illegal way to terminate this pregnancy if it had come to that. As far as I was concerned, it was my only responsible option. It was my body, my responsibility. Being angry at Kevin never entered my mind. I stayed in that relationship way too long. So it was just, she knew that she didn't want this. And that even if she did, that tying herself to Kevin forever was not the right move here. She knew by this point that their relationship had already worn out, had passed its expiration date. And she knew that she didn't want to make a choice that would make him be a parent or pay child support forever, that neither of them really wanted this. Regardless of her consulting him or not. And I just find that there's so much strength and conviction in that. And I completely agree. Like, if you cannot be a committing, nurturing parent, don't have children. Parenting needs to be a very conscious, very thoughtful choice on the part of anybody. And if you know that you can't be that person, I am totally for not going through with it, finding any way, whether it's, preventative or otherwise, to not have that child. Because at the end of the day, if you can't be a good parent, like, you're doing so much more harm to a child than you ever could by getting an abortion. That's just how I've always felt about this. And, it's just sort of balancing, like, it could have been a life, but there's no conscientiousness there, or there's no consciousness, there's no feeling, there's no nothing yet for this unborn life. But the parent very much has to bear all of that, all of the responsibility, all of the risk and everything that comes along with it. And to me, that outweighs a possible future that doesn't exist yet. I'm so with her on this decision. And it also makes me think back to Gilmore Girls, where, we have the flashback in Dear Emily and Richard about Lorelai's pregnancy and how this all came about, and how her parents sort of spoke up on the decision for Lorelai not to have an abortion, especially Emily. But it doesn't seem like something Lorelai wanted. She seemed resigned to go through with it, almost like she felt an immediate connection to the child and she knew she wanted it. But, Lorelai was the one who made the choice to give birth and raise a child by Christopher. She technically had the option not to have a child with that man. And in that way, she's, the one who tethered herself to him forever. And that was a distinct choice she made. And, You know, I don't think it's either here or there. I know a lot of people don't like Christopher, but you know, at the end of the day, Lorelai was the one who got to make that conscious choice for herself. And I think that there's something just right about that. You know, she got to make the choice for herself, I think. Granted, her parents were not super on board with the other option, but it just, she always got the sense that it was exactly what was supposed to happen, and she's happy about it. And I saw that connection between, well, I mean, it's an opposite situation in a way, but just the connection that Kelly could have to a situation like that, where it's an unexpected and not necessarily desired pregnancy, and that the right thing happened for each person in its own situation.
Yep. And Kelly, just echoing what you said, definitely made the right call for herself. And thankfully, eventually, she was able to break it off with Kevin and just realize, again, this is not the person for me. This is not someone who I really, truly love. And we are able to allow to come on down. You're the next contestant on Kelly Bishop's life, Lee Leonard.
Yeah, the serendipity of that just is so delightful. Just the fact that he lived in the same building as her ex, and they would run into each other at the Green Kitchen, and then suddenly she was on his talk show, and he's like, "So you're still with Kevin?" Just consistently asking her at commercial breaks, like, "You single? You want to go out?" How about that? I just thought that was really cute.
Yeah, it definitely was. And I love how, as she starts to really dive into her relationship with Lee, that she highlights that she had never truly been in love until this man, that all of her past relationships were just things that she thought was love, that she might have mistaken just a sense of comfortability for love. I think, again, she's not the first and last person that will ever do this. So many people in life will just mistake compatibility or a level of comfort for genuine, I'm in love with this person. I mean, just to parallel things, I mean, Dean, season 1, we've talked about it. It's easy to mistake love for something that's not love. But it was so beautiful to see her finally recognizing that, oh my gosh, this is something now that I actually have with Lee that I have never had before. And just how their relationship blossomed into marriage, and just something that made her so profoundly happy over time because she had found her person.
I love what she says about him. He challenged me. He respected me. There was real depth to him. He was thoughtful and attentive. He was honest and fun and wicked smart and hardworking and solid as a rock. This man will never bore me. Because Kevin was someone that she found bored her. And she just had this revelation about Lee one day when he was doing nothing in particular, but, you know, walking across the apartment or something. And she just has this lightning bolt moment of, this is what I always needed. That was the moment when I gave myself permission to break my tired, self-protective, dead-end habit of falling in lust with Mr. Right Now, and genuinely fell in love for the first time in my life. And it's just so relatable to me. And I think it is such a great way to describe what love is. You know, someone who meets you on an intellectual level, who respects you, who has depth. She's very impressed by his erudition and his thoughtfulness. She appreciated his honesty and just how much he was always there for her, how he was just so level. And I think she needed that because she had been with, you know, a string of guys who weren't really good for her. And so to have someone like that and for her to realize what was important in a man is crucial. I think we all have to hit that point at some point in our lives where we understand who's right for us. And I just, again, saw myself and my relationship so much in the way that she describes Lee, which is why I was so gut punched in the dedication when she says, "To Lee Leonard, who knew me better than anyone and loved me anyway." Like, when someone just gets you and accepts you for everything that you are and everything that you aren't, that is love. That is true and pure and good. And I just was gobsmacked before I even hit the forward. And I think that's a mark of a great book, you know?
Yeah. Lee, rest in peace, but you were a good one.
Yeah, I can't believe just the strength and bravery that he exhibited throughout, the last 20 years or so of his life. I think it was 6 primary cancers that he was diagnosed with, and he battled every single one of them up till the last moment. I think he was diagnosed in his 50s or his 60s the first time, and he lived to 89. And there's just so much to praise about him, and that strength is one of them. And that was what truly got me and sent me sobbing. I am not normally a very overly emotional person. I'm not a crier when things are sad or moving. I more so cry when I'm frustrated. And so to be moved to tears in the scene, or in the moments where she's describing Lee sort of being in hospice care in their own home, they were able to sort of set him up to spend his last days in their home, and her being at his side when it happened, and just literally watching the life fade was just, I couldn't. I could, but I couldn't.
Yeah. And just from what I know about you, and that you are 1,000% not a crier with those types of things, when I realized that it had gotten you to that point, I mean, I had already read the book, so I was already familiar with why and how, but it's very telling to me that it did get to that point for you based off of what I know about you. And I think that just speaks volumes to, again, the passion and the chemistry and the closeness that these two people had, that they can elicit that sort of response from anyone who is reading their story.
Yeah, they were married for 38 years, and just the way she talked about him and the way she described his role in her life and how supportive he was of her, and just his health declining in those last couple of years, and her still being devoted to working through that time to get her through it. And also just how supportive he was when she needed to leave to go on a job, and how they made all of that work, but how she always wanted to be able to go back and spend time with him, how that was such a priority to her. And even how Gilmore, the production of Gilmore, really stepped up when he was diagnosed. I think it was maybe the 4th primary, I don't know, one of his cancers, was while they were filming season 3 or 4, I think, of Gilmore. And she was able to negotiate a contract for herself where she was able to go home for 2 weeks at a time to be with him throughout his treatment. And the production company started paying for her flights back and forth and for her apartment for while she was there. And, not only did her friendship with Amy and Lauren really bolster her, but just the whole Gilmore family was kind of there for her when she really needed them. And I think that's beautiful.
It definitely is. And throughout those few decades, which again, spoiler, as we slowly start to see that progression and get to the end of Lee's life, his support and his vigilance and just standing behind her was constant and steadfast as she started, now getting these jobs like Dirty Dancing, and getting a role that she didn't expect to, because she was not contracted to play Baby's mom. That's not the role that she had auditioned for. That's not what she was offered. But talk to me a little bit about that, and what we saw with that experience and how that shook out for her.
Come to think of it, Dirty Dancing was probably the first thing I saw Kelly Bishop in, but I didn't have any frame of reference for her. And it wasn't until reading this book that I knew that she wasn't even cast as Marjorie Houseman in the first instance. She was meant to play Vivian Pressman, who, again, calling back to the 92nd Street Y, when she's telling this story in front of everybody, and she's like, yeah, she's this married woman who's taking dance lessons with Johnny, and it's clear that she wants to nail him. Just like, oh my God, that's awesome. Just, the humor of this woman. I loved it. And so I thought it was interesting that she arrives in Roanoke and they sweep her off to a gazebo, fittingly enough, and are like, stand next to Jennifer Grey. And she's like, okay, I'm not even going to have any scenes with her, but I might as well introduce myself. I just worked with her dad, and, I didn't know that she had worked with Joey Gray, or that her dad was in the industry, because I mean, Nepo babies are a dime a dozen, but sometimes you just don't know until you know. And it's just so funny that she comes in, and not only that, but Jerry Orbach plays her on-screen husband, and she was in her first Broadway show ever with him, Promises, Promises. And so they were very familiar with each other. They became great friends on that set. They would play golf together. Yuck, but okay. That's red flag number 2 for Kelly, but like, we'll forgive it. And I loved the stories of the time on that set and how they all felt like a big misfit family, just off in the, the Appalachian Mountains and in Virginia and North Carolina. I love that movie. I think I showed it to Dan last year. He had never seen it. And yeah, it was a classic for a reason.
Yeah. And just knowing what we know and what we get from Emily and that portrayal, Emily Kelly in Gilmore Girls, it just makes it so much more fun to go back and watch Dirty Dancing, being like, oh my gosh, Emily Gilmore before she was Emily Gilmore, and having all of that context. And that's also what this book did for me now in terms of rewatching Gilmore, where as I'm going back to like just any episode that Kelly is in now and just knowing so much more about her as a person, it just makes those rewatches of these episodes, at least the past couple of weeks for me, since this book has come out, so much more enjoyable and fresh, because I have so much more context and knowledge in the back of my mind, and like just hindsight as to like, wow, this is really why you're so good in this role and why you were able to bring so much to your character. And it's making these rewatches new in a way and fresh in a way that I hadn't previously experienced.
Totally. We said this was going to be a 60-minute episode, and we've already breezed past that, and we've barely scratched the surface of Gilmore Girls itself. So I think that's the perfect place to go next. And what you just said there is completely true. Understanding her history really brings an extra depth of feeling to the mother-daughter relationship because of her own best friendship with her own mom. And you really feel that yearning for closeness that comes through because of that. She was able to have a beautiful relationship with her own mom. And so to think of being a mom who doesn't get that reciprocation from her daughter, it adds so many layers to it that were never really there before. And, she isn't Emily the way that Lauren claims to be Lorelai, or that we see that Lauren is Lorelai, but she definitely sees herself reflected in this generational story. And she's instantly connected to the script. She's very impressed by it. She has a beat on this character in the same way that Alexis and Lauren claim to have instant connections to those characters as well. And she says that through this extraordinary script, I might have an opportunity to explore Louise, so her own grandmother, her mom's mom, who got pregnant at 16. And always kind of resented Jane for that, as if it was Jane's fault that she got knocked up at 16. But to explore that relationship with Louise and her strained relationship with my mom through exploring Emily and her strained relationship with Lorelai, and to add to the perfection, play a cold, condescending, emotionally distant mother, which is infinitely more fun than playing a nice one.
Yeah. Her relationship with her mother and just knowing what she did about her own mother's relationship with her grandmother, I think definitely shaped how she took on Emily Gilmore. And I think it was just even more spectacular for me that she approached this role again as a woman who like we have said, chose to remain childless, never wanted kids, and then just had to step into this role as a maternal and, this grandmotherly figure to Lorelai and Rory. And yes, she is cold. She just is almost like a stone pillar sometimes of emotion with Lorelai, not so much with Rory. But I think it was just remarkable to see her venture into that, just as someone who never wanted kids in her life, but who just, dove headfirst into it. And for all of the distanceness, if that's a word, distanceness, I don't even know anymore. I can't talk anymore. For all of, I guess, the lack of closeness, maybe that's a better way to put it, that there was between Lorelai and Emily. At the end of the day, this was someone who really had genuine care and affection and love for Lorelai and for Rory, even if she wasn't able to really put that out there in terms of vocalizing that, or just even giving any sort of that indication to Lorelai. She did that a lot better with Rory, but she cared about her daughter and her granddaughter. And I think, again, just going back to her relationship with her mother, it's because she was so close that I think she was able to take a lot of those interpersonal relationships that she had with her own family and just insert that into Gilmore.
Absolutely. And it's beautiful that she came out of that kind of with a daughter. You know, she's childless, but Lauren Graham will always be her TVD, you know, her TV daughter. And she's able to have that sort of closeness and affection with someone who could be her daughter without actually having to go through that process of parenthood. So I love that for them, that they're still that close. She's not as close with Alexis. It seems like basically everybody is not as close with Alexis from all the context I gather about the cast and their relationships to each other. Alexis is like often left out of the conversation sometimes, where it's like, oh, Lauren and Amy and I did this thing together. And I think that there's a respect and a fondness there for Alexis, but not a closeness for any of them. And Alexis is just a very introverted, private kind of person who just hasn't maintained the same relationship, but that doesn't mean that there's any bad blood or anything there. So it's still nice to see that she's able to have this enduring relationship with her TV daughter, and also, you know, the woman who brought all of these characters to life, Amy. And I was intrigued by the way that she was talking about Amy in this book. There's one passage that I've sort of highlighted here. I already know from her writing that she was that she was smart with an edgy, unconventional sense of humor. It was immediately apparent that there was also an eclectic self-confidence about her that was a real breath of fresh air. There was no pretense about her, no slickness, no political glad-handing or equivocating. Just a woman who knew the value of her work and the quality of her project and was crystal clear on how it should be done. And to me, that actually sounds like Kelly. It sounds like she's describing herself when describing Amy, and maybe that's why there was such a strong intuitive connection between them that made for a real friendship. Because, I mean, they're both dancers in their pasts, and so they can obviously connect on that. They even studied at the same ballet school in Toluca Lake, California. But I think part of it is just that they see some of themselves in each other, just being so confident, being so bold in how they speak to people who are treating them without the respect they deserve. There's an anecdote early in the book about when she first moves to New York City and how somebody puts their hand on her ass on the subway. And she turns around and she's like, really? Is this your sex life? Like, if this is what it takes for you to get off, like, that's pretty sad. And the guy just sort of slowly removed his hand and pretended like nobody was talking to him and like it never happened. And just that sort of clearness of what's okay and what's not, and how you deserve to be treated, and what's right and what's fair. Kelly always seems to have such a strong intuitive sense of that, and I think Amy does too. And I think both of them lack that pretense and that politicization of the industry that happens. The stories abound of, you know, again, the glad handing of each other, the nepotism, the connections and the favors and all of that goes on. It's just two women who know the value of themselves strong enough to stand up for it and to be crystal clear about what all that's worth.
Yeah, I think we definitely see that closeness within the characters, but also within their interpersonal relationships as well. And I think, just echoing off of what you said, Amy always did such a spectacular job with the writing and making it easy for her characters to really step into those shoes that they had to fill. And this was a quote that I've always loved from Kelly that I want to read as it pertains to what Amy did for her, and just for, I think, what is one of her most iconic scenes that we just call back to for I was about to say Emily, for Kelly again within Gilmore. But she's talking about that scene when she's basically just like eviscerating Shira. And she says, I kept a smile on Emily's face so that from a distance, it could have appeared that she was complimenting Shira on her dress while asking who designed it, while she was actually delivering lines like, "You were a two-bit gold digger fresh off the bus from Hicksville when you met Mitchum at whatever bar you stumbled into. Now enjoy the event." It was an absolute masterpiece by Amy and a joy to deliver, not because it was only Emily at her force of nature best, but also because it was another display of her fierce love for her granddaughter. And that's what Amy did best within the writing. And so I think the appreciation there just goes both ways for what Kelly has always had for Amy and for what Amy has always had for Kelly, because it was Amy's writing capabilities and talent there that allowed Kelly to shine. And Kelly was, again, then just able to do that, which is what Amy appreciated, because she was able to take her writing and really embody it. Going back to like what we talked about at the beginning of this book, she knew that she had found her Emily when Kelly walked into the room. And then all Kelly did in the intervening years was just continue to deliver on that and just get better and better and better. And I think that's what allowed Amy and Kelly to just have like this really also beautiful work relationship and pairing with one another.
Exactly. Amy knew that Kelly got it. And I also love how Kelly talks about her perception of these relationships in the book. I was always convinced, and I'm sure Amy was too, that Emily loved Lorelai as much as she loved Rory. She just didn't have a clue how to connect with her, and her frustration over that only added to her icy disapproval. In true "what I fear I create" form, she relentlessly made it difficult for Lorelai to be around her, and then resented Lorelai for keeping her distance. And it just totally nails, I think, the dynamic, and she got the emotion that was underlying their troubles so perfectly. And so they really got each other. Amy got Kelly and Kelly got Amy, and they understood these characters' motivations and where they were going. And the symbiosis that came out of that just makes her, I think, one of the best characters on the show. She's not always likable and she's not always right, but Kelly brought so much pathos to her. And we could sometimes forgive Emily some of her worst transgressions because we could feel this coming through, this desire to connect, this vulnerability. And I love what she says about what happens in Lazy, Hazy, Crazy Days of Summer. I never thought about it this way, and I just thought it was so brilliant. But when Emily calls Lorelai at work and says, like, "What day is it, Lorelai? It's Thursday. You knew we were coming back on Thursday, and yet no call, no message." And she's like, "It's only 11 in the morning, Mom. I still have 12 hours before I've really truly failed here, before I've truly screwed up." And Kelly's take on this is so perfect, and I never really put these pieces together. She says that part of me couldn't imagine that sense of entitlement and looking that hard for an excuse to criticize your daughter for supposedly offending you. But another part of me reacted to it as a show of Emily's weird, deeply hidden insecurity that her daughter didn't care enough about her to even notice she'd been gone without knowing why or what to do about it. And I was just like, oh, that so perfectly encapsulates their whole relationship, really. Like, just these two women on different pages who didn't know what to do about each other, who clearly loved each other, but couldn't find a way to meet each other on the same level. They had different ideas and expectations, and they weren't able to put aside their own neuroses, especially on Emily's part, the insecurity and the vulnerability that came through in moments like that are so infuriating. Kelly was really able to bring all that out and to understand it on a level that brought depth to the whole thing.
Yeah, I agree. And again, I think it's just a testament to what Amy and Dan did on the show with the writing, because when we get into season 7, and Amy and Dan are no longer a part of this equation, Kelly has been very transparent with saying that she did not love season 7 and that she got bored by the material and she wasn't finding it as fresh or as lively or as fulfilling to her as it was all of those seasons in the past. And I think it's just very transparent. Like, just 2 + 2 is 4. It's because Amy and Dan are no longer there. We're not getting that same level of character depth and in time given as we were in the past.
Yeah. Yes, Vinny, tell us your opinion. We really want to hear it. You're so insightful.
He's clearly got a lot to say right now, folks. Just hang with us.
I mean, he knows it's a great book. He wants to put in his opinions. I want to hear him. She doesn't crap talk the writers of season 7, which is classy of her, but she definitely acknowledges, I think it's in her 92nd Street Y talk with Lauren, that it did become a little wooden and it lost something of the magic because nobody can really try to imitate Amy Sherman Palladino. She has such a distinctive voice that anyone who tries to replicate that is doomed to fail. So, she's up there with the rest of us who don't love season 7. I don't think it's terrible, and it still gets really good reviews on aggregate, I guess, on IMDb. When even your worst season of television is better than a lot of other stuff out there, I think that's still pretty great. But yeah, it lost a lot of the magic. And then she talks about the revival a little bit too, in getting to work with everybody again and getting to reunite at ATX in 2015, a little bit before that happened. And it breaks my heart that she says that Ed was the first one to sign up for that, but he didn't make it long enough to actually go to the event. He was one of her best friends, it sounds like, on set. They became very close. They shared a trailer. They did the New York Times crossword puzzle together every day, which is adorable. And, they were truly real friends. They had so much in common. They were both New York theater people. They both won Tonys that same night. Him for Best Featured Actor in a Play for Mrs. What's it called? Mrs. Warren's something. It's in my notes somewhere. Here we go. Mrs. Warren's Profession. They were both addicted to the crossword. So cute. And losing Ed was hard for everybody. She had to find out from page 6 that he was suffering from brain cancer in the first place. And she was worried that she wasn't going to even get to say goodbye. But then she gets a call from Star saying, hey, do you want to come to Sloan Kettering and say goodbye to Ed? She encouraged her to talk to him and to say goodbye. And I love that she just gave him a kiss on the forehead and left a little lipstick print and said, tell him that's from me.
Yeah. I definitely, I think you got more emotional with this book than I did, which is normally, it's a reversal of that. But that moment did get me as well. And I think that's why she went into the revival. I mean, you had Amy and Dan back and the cast was all back, but I think that's why we got the performance from Kelly that we did in the revival. And to me, she was honestly the highlight of the revival for me in terms of the performance that she gave. And it's tragic, but I think it was because obviously the entire cast is coming off the heels of losing Ed, but also, Lee is still just declining at this point in time. And so she had a very real life transitional event going on that paralleled what was happening to Emily in the story. And that's why I think when we get those scenes, with her burying her husband in the show, and we just see that look of just utter sadness on her face and what am I going to do with my life now? And what is it going to look like? She said it in the show, like, I've been married to him for decades. I don't know what my life looks like without him. I think it's because she was reckoning also with what was happening with her and Lee and coming to terms with the fact that probably very soon she was going to be going down a very identical path with her own real life husband. And that broke my heart.
Yeah. And something I didn't really put together either was that Amy lost her dad in 2012. And so there was a lot of her own experience of losing her dad and watching her mom experience widowhood that went into that as well. And so as tragic as it was that Ed wasn't around for the revival, his passing ultimately coincided again sort of poetically with the experiences of both Amy and Kelly. And it really came together to make what I think is unequivocally the best part of the whole revival. There were a few things that really didn't land for me and didn't really work, but never once have I said that Emily's storyline was on that list. So it was a beautiful cathartic moment, I think, for both of them to explore that and to give Ed such a beautiful tribute as well, because he was such a force in the show and in show business in general, and from all accounts a lovely human being. So the fact that we lost him, it was sad, but they were able to make something so beautiful from it, and we'll always have that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that was very well said. And then I think that just transitions us into what does happen with Kelly in her real life. And we start getting towards the end of this book and closing it out with her actually losing Lee and with him passing. And I know that had such a profound impact on you when you were reading this. So I just want to, let you have the floor first with this one.
Yeah. She kind of starts leading up to it a little bit also by telling a story about how she was going outside after an ice storm and she slips on black ice and had to go to the hospital. She had fractured her sacrum and her pelvis in 2 places, so a pretty serious injury. And she says that my husband and I became the cutest debilitated couple on the block, which is adorable. Just, kind of being in your 70s and having to cope with all of that. I think he was like far older than her. I think he was 89. Maybe he was 79. I don't know. But I know that he was several years older than her when he ultimately did pass. But, it's one of those things where I'm staring down the barrel of getting married and just thinking 50 years down the line about being in her same position. I was just knocked on my ass a little by the possibilities and the unfortunate hard truths about mortality and love, and eventually having to say goodbye to the people who we love the most. And it was hard. And we also heard the story of when her mom passed as well. I think it was 1993 or 1994 that her beloved mom died, and that was hard to hear as well. But at the same time, it's one of those inevitabilities of life that our parents will usually go before us. But I think losing a partner is on a whole other level of sadness sometimes, especially because we move out from our parents' homes and we say goodbye and live our own independent lives for so long, often with a partner. And when we're so used to that, not having it anymore and having to watch someone decline the way that she did with Lee is just so touching and difficult to deal with. I mean, I'm hoping against hope that for me it's going to be a very long time until I have to get there. But it just, every time I read about stuff like this, that kind of stuff gets to me. But especially with this one, I think it was particularly touching and difficult to hear, but a necessary, unfortunate truth about life, I guess.
Yeah. And I think it just echoes what we've said before about how just raw and real she is in this book. She doesn't gloss over the hardness of losing her husband. She doesn't gloss over the tragedy of losing her mother. She doesn't gloss over how problematic some of her past relationships were. Her choices as a woman to not have kids. And that is, I think, one of the strongest, like I said, I think right from the start of this episode's takeaways that I've had is just that Kelly Bishop is not shying away from telling you who she is as a human being and how that has impacted her in every way from start to finish in her personal life and also in her professional career. And if there's one thing I can say, like, I appreciate most about this book, it's probably that. And it's why I think, like, anybody who hasn't picked up a copy of this should and just go read it, because whether or not you're a Gilmore fan or even know of Kelly Bishop yet already, there's just some real, just important truths that she puts forth that any human being can take away.
Yeah, I definitely found myself connecting to her as a person, notwithstanding my love of Gilmore. She says fairly early on that she's always liked animals more than people. I mean, same. Um, she describes them just having more love and attention to give than anyone. And I totally resonate with that. I've always been a big animal lover. I too am kind of contemplating not having kids and just having a huge menagerie of animals. And seeing Kelly do that with such conviction. And the fact that like even into her 70s and 80s, she was still feeding all the neighborhood cats. I was like, that's going to be me. And, you know, if a few raccoons and possums show up, I'll be totally cool with that. Like, want to befriend all the squirrels on my block and have them know I'm the one to come to for trail mix. Like that, I would probably be happier living my life that way. And seeing someone do it so gracefully and still getting so much out of life is very inspirational. And there are so many little things that she says in this book that are uplifting. And there's one near the end that especially stuck out to me. No matter what age you are, you can always go back and take classes on the side. Whatever touches your heart. You don't have to miss out on the joy of learning something you're passionate about. If it's in you, it's out there waiting for you. And I thought that was so beautiful.
Yeah. I would ask if you had any final thoughts about this book, but I think that's a really nice capper. I will just say also, like, just from what we've seen with her on screen, I've never met Kelly in person. I mean, it would be awesome one of these days too. I might have to go back to New Jersey and just not be a creeper and maybe just try and find her in a normal way. Just saying.
Just stalk South Orange just a little bit. I feel the same way about Amy's Brooklyn Heights neighborhood. I'm like, I kind of want to walk down that street and just get a sense of like the neighborhood and, you know, pop into a coffee shop and experience the life. You know, if I happen to run into her and spot her somewhere, like, so be it. Dan and I were having this conversation last night where it's like, yeah, it sounds creepy, but I think it only starts to cross the line if you're like truly being weird about it and, you know, interrupting people's daily lives to talk to them about stuff. And I'm not that kind of person. You know, these people are people, and just because we're interested in their lives and interested to see kind of where they live or what their routine might look like, it doesn't mean that we have to be way too parasocially involved in their lives. I think there's a healthy level of that can be attained. But
yeah, but case in point, it just seems that from reading this book and from knowing what we do about Kelly at this point in time, that she is just a kind human being. And the world needs more of that. So, you know, all I can say is just embrace a person like that being in the world for as long as we have them, because she just sounds like a beautiful, beautiful soul. I can't talk anymore. A beautiful soul. It's echoed in her book. It's echoed in this writing, and just who she is as a person and the kindness that she exudes, like you said, not only to human beings, but to animals as well, which is also equally important.
Yeah, exactly. There's so much more I could say, especially about Kelly's takes on the characters of Gilmore Girls. There's a lot more meat to those chapters, which, you know, maybe it's good. Us not talking about it will allow you to go out and experience it for yourself. But I think someday we should come back to it, maybe in like a more Emily focused character study or something. We talked about her and Richard a little more together, God, 2 years ago now. But I think there's a little bit more to mine out of those relationships. And now that we have Kelly's perspective on it, I think it would be fun to revisit that and go a little more in depth. But just to wrap up, I was watching a Good Morning America segment from a few months ago when she was doing the press for this book.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the question that was posed to her was something along the lines of like, what would you want people to say about you and your legacy? And she says, I'd love them to say that she was a swell broad. And that's exactly what I'm going to say. I think she was a swell broad. Priscilla Lopez did a blurb for the back of her dust jacket that says, "The third Gilmore is a number one. I loved it. Kelly Bishop is sassy. She's funny. She's honest. She's a winner." And I agree with all of that. Like, I think swell broad is the perfect term to wrap her up, to encompass the sass and the wit and the attitude that she has carried throughout her life. That is just remarkable to see. It's nice to see someone who is so self-assured, but not conceited or pretentious. I think she has a very healthy grasp on reality and on who she is as a person. And I think that's something we can all aspire to. I want to be a swell broad. I want someone to say that about me someday, preferably in a New York accent.
Noted. I'll be sure to get on that one of these days. Maybe in, just, I don't know. I'll just write a nice little blurb on you one of these days as a part of like podcast partner, Swole Broad.
Yeah. I just appreciate her poise, her patience, her discipline. I think Amy does too, which is probably why she was so great in the role of Emily. She was so punctual. She was always, I love the story she tells about her and Ed always being the first one at the dinner table, even though nobody else was ready, because they're so used to that theater background where it's like your call time is your call time and the show will go on without you if you're not there. And so they would sit at the dinner table and be like, well, aren't we assholes? I just love that so much. And I think everyone can take a page out of her professionalism, out of her confidence, out of her work ethic, and just her devil may care attitude about the way she approaches life with like, just throw yourself into it, do what you want to do, never let anyone tell you you're anything less than what you are, and go on living your life in a way that won't make you puke when you read an in-depth biography about yourself at the end.
Brava.
I brought it back.
Yeah, you did. I think that's a good place to close out this one, though. Again, we'll have to circle back on a lot of the points that you previously mentioned because we always have more thoughts. But I think that's where we should probably leave this one off for this week.
Yeah, we've already gone way over, but what's new? That's us.
Yep. So we hope that you have enjoyed this episode. Again, if you have not picked up a copy of Kelly's book, please be sure to do so. It's pretty much available at any bookstore, Amazon, Target, any online website that you can find will have it for you to order. So we don't even need to include descriptions in the links in our description below, because you can just find it on your own, but be sure to get a copy of that. In the meantime, if you have enjoyed this episode and you just want more GG content in general, please go back and watch some of our old episodes. We always do appreciate that support. We have a lot of good things coming as we go into 2025 that we're really excited about, so stay tuned for that. And in the meantime, on your way out, if you could just remember to do all of those YouTube-y things for us, please like this video, subscribe to our channel. It is one click below, and we are always so grateful for any support that we receive.
Indeed we are. And on that note, we will see you next Friday for dinner.
Have a good weekend, everybody, and be kind.
Ciao.